Yesterday morning, Brent crude oil, the benchmark price that determines what you pay for gas, what airlines charge for tickets, what grocery stores charge for everything that gets delivered by truck, fell 11% in a single trading session. Not slowly, not gradually, 11% in hours. From $114 a barrel, where it had been sitting after Fujairah burned and US destroyers came under sustained barrage, down to $98, the sharpest single-day oil price drop since the war began on February 28. Markets in New York surged, bond yields fell, global share prices leaped, and the reason for all of it was one document. One page, 14 points, being negotiated right now between Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and several Iranian officials directly and through mediators. A document that, according to US officials and two additional sources briefed on the matter who spoke to Axios, represents the closest the United States and Iran have been to an agreement since this war began. A Pakistani source directly involved in the mediation, the country that has been the diplomatic backbone of every back channel in this conflict, told Reuters for words yesterday that caused oil traders to hit their sell buttons simultaneously. "We will close this very soon," and then he said three more, "We are getting close." This is May 7, 2026, day 68 of the Iran war, and what happened in the last 36 hours has flipped this entire conflict on its axis. 3 days ago, Fujairah was on fire. 2 days ago, CENTCOM couldn't confirm if the ceasefire was intact. Yesterday, oil fell 11% on peace deal optimism, and today Iran is expected to deliver its formal response to the memorandum through Pakistani mediators, a response that could either end this war within a month or trigger the heaviest bombing campaign the United States has threatened yet. Welcome to Dr.Elena.Murphy. If you're new here, this channel is your deep dive source for the military, geopolitical, and economic stories reshaping the world. And what you are about to hear is the most important breakdown of this war's diplomatic endgame that you will find anywhere today, what is actually inside the one-page memorandum. Every clause, every red line, every concession, why China flew Iran's foreign minister to Beijing the night before the deal became public. The sentence that an Israeli official said that caused Netanyahu's office to panic, the detail about Iran's minimum wage that tells you more about why Tehran is moving toward this deal than any diplomatic statement ever could, and the 8-day countdown to the Trump-Xi summit that is now the most consequential meeting in modern geopolitical history. Make sure you are subscribed right now. Tap that button because this story, the story of whether this war ends or explodes, is reaching its decisive moment today, and you need to be here when the answer comes. Let's start with the document itself, because the headlines yesterday said one-page memo and moved on. But the details inside that document, reported by Axios, CNN, The Wall Street Journal, Times of Israel, and confirmed by a Pakistani mediation source to Reuters, are nothing short of extraordinary. This is not a ceasefire extension. This is not a temporary pause. This is a proposed framework for ending one of the most economically disruptive conflicts in modern history, and what Iran is being asked to give up in exchange is something its supreme leader publicly said he would never surrender. Here is what the 14-point Memorandum of Understanding actually contains, verified across 5 separate outlets. Among other provisions, the deal would involve Iran committing to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment, the US agreeing to lift its sanctions and release billions in frozen Iranian funds, and both sides lifting restrictions around transit through the Strait of Hormuz. But that is just the headline. Go deeper. Under the proposed terms, Iran would commit to a moratorium on uranium enrichment lasting at least 12 years, with some sources suggesting 15 years as a likely compromise between the US demand of 20 years and Iran's initial offer of 5. Tehran has stockpiles of uranium enriched up to 60% purity, 90%, is needed to power a nuclear weapon. The Wall Street Journal reported one idea being discussed is halting enrichment for 12 to 15 years before allowing Iran to enrich only up to 3.67% purity, the level used for civilian nuclear energy, not weapons. Tehran would also pledge never to seek a nuclear weapon or conduct weaponization-related activities, would submit to an enhanced inspections regime including snap inspections by unmonitors. Snap inspections. That is the phrase that matters most in that sentence. Iran's entire nuclear cat-and-mouse game with the IAEA for the last 2 decades has been built on the ability to slow-walk inspections, deny access, and buy time. Snap inspections unannounced, immediate, non-negotiable. Eliminate that game entirely. You cannot hide a weapons program from inspectors who can show up without notice. And then there is the clause that Iran has rejected every single time it has been proposed in every negotiation for the last 5 years. 2 sources with knowledge also claimed Iran would agree to remove its highly enriched uranium from the country, a key U.S. priority that Tehran has rejected up to now. One source said an option being discussed as moving the material to the United States. Moving it to the United States, Iran's 900 plus pounds of highly enriched uranium, the material that sits 30% of the way between civilian nuclear fuel and a weapon, physically leaving Iranian territory and going to American custody. That is not a negotiating concession, that is a strategic surrender of the one card that gives Iran deterrence against a future military strike, and according to two sources with direct knowledge, Iran is considering it. In its current form, the move would declare an end to the war in the region and the start of a 30-day period of negotiations on a detailed agreement to open the strait, limit Iran's nuclear program, and lift US sanctions. Those negotiations could happen in Islamabad or Geneva, two sources said. Iran's restrictions on shipping through the strait and the U.S. naval blockade would be gradually lifted during that 30-day period, according to a U.S. official. If the negotiations collapse, U.S. forces would be able to restore the blockade or resume military action, the U.S. official said. That last sentence is the one Iran's hardliners are staring at. If the 30-day talks collapse after the MOU is signed, the U.S. gets its blockade back and its bombs back. Iran gets nothing it gave up returned. The moratorium cannot be unmoratoriumed. The uranium that left the country does not come back. Iran is being asked to make irreversible concessions in exchange for a 30-day negotiating window, with the knowledge that if that window closes without a final deal, Washington's military and economic tools are immediately restored. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said it plainly in the White House briefing room. If Iran wants a civilian nuclear program, they could have that if that's what they wanted, but they're not acting like that's what they wanted. They're acting like they want a military nuclear program. That's unacceptable. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, make sure you are subscribed to Dr.elena.murphy right now and have your notifications turned on. We cover this story every single day with the depth it demands. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Now let me show you the development that most Western coverage is treating as a footnote, but which is actually the most strategically important move of the entire week. Because the question everyone should be asking is not just what is in the memorandum. The question is why Iran is now moving toward it after 68 days of refusing to yield on nuclear issues, and the answer flew into Beijing on Wednesday. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, in Beijing as tensions with the United States mount over the Strait of Hormuz. Araghchi's visit comes a week before US President Donald Trump visits Beijing for a summit with President Xi Jinping on May 14 and 15. This was Araghchi's first in-person visit to China since the war began on February 28. Wang Yi and Araghchi had spoken by phone at least 3 times during the conflict. But this meeting in person in Beijing 1 week before Trump arrives in the same city was not a courtesy call. It was a strategic positioning exercise, with a very specific message being delivered in both directions. China pressed Iran on Wednesday to pursue a diplomatic resolution to the Middle East conflict and refrain from resuming hostilities, as Beijing seeks to cement its position as a key mediator ahead of a high-stakes summit with the U.S. In a meeting with his Iranian counterpart, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called for an immediate end to the hostilities while urging warring powers to continue diplomatic negotiations. China also called for a prompt resumption of shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Now here is the detail that should stop every viewer cold. That last point, China calling for a prompt resumption of shipping through Hormuz, appeared in China's official foreign ministry statement of the meeting. That point was absent in a statement posted by Iran's foreign ministry on Telegram. Same meeting, 2 different readouts. China said open Hormuz. Iran's version of the meeting did not include that line. Iran deleted China's demand from its own account of the conversation. Think about what that tells you about how uncomfortable that demand was to receive. China, Iran's most important economic lifeline, the country buying 90% of Iran's oil exports, the country that has vetoed every UN Security Council resolution against Tehran, the country whose $400 billion strategic partnership is the only reason Iran's regime has been economically functional under decades of sanctions, looked Iran's foreign minister in the eye and said open the strait, and Iran's government could not even bring itself to put that in writing. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was deeply distressed by the war, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry blamed the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on both Iran and the U.S., calling on both parties to ensure safe shipping through the waterway. Blamed both sides, not the U.S. alone. Both China blaming Iran publicly for the Hormuz closure is not something Tehran was expecting from its closest ally, and the reason China is applying this pressure is not subtle. According to Goldman Sachs, the Gulf Cooperation Council states are losing roughly $700 million daily by not Being able to move oil, and China itself, which imports roughly a third of its oil through Hormuz, has been absorbing those losses for 68 consecutive days. About 1,600 ships are still stuck in the Strait of Hormuz, unable to move in either direction. Ship traffic has collapsed from 138 vessels per day before the war to single digits. The world's most important energy waterway is, for practical purposes, a parking lot. Chinese leadership wants tankers moving and trade flowing out of the Persian Gulf into Asian markets, said Amir Hanjani, a board member at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. They have no appetite for the inflationary shock and potential recession that a prolonged blockade would trigger across the region. China told Iran to move toward a deal, and Iran's foreign minister, rather than refuse publicly, flew home from Beijing and found that a one-page memorandum was already circulating between Witkoff, Kushner, and Iranian officials. The timing is not coincidental. Beijing delivered the message in person. Tehran got it. Now let's look at what Trump said on Wednesday, because his Truth Social post and his White House statements from that day are a masterclass in the simultaneous use of the carrot and the stick, and the sharpest version of that we have seen yet from this administration. Assuming Iran agrees to give what has been agreed to, which is perhaps a big assumption, the already legendary epic fury will be at an end, and the highly effective blockade will allow the Hormuz Strait to be open to all, including Iran, Trump wrote on Truth Social Wednesday morning. Open to all, including Iran. He capitalized open to all. He is telling Iran in the same sentence, agree, and not only does the war end, but you get your shipping routes back too. The country that your navy has been mining and blockading for 68 days gets to use those same waters again. And then the sentence that followed also. In capitals. If they don't agree, the bombing starts, and it will be, sadly, at a much higher level and intensity than it was before. Higher level, higher intensity. Operation Epic Fury's first phase hit nuclear sites, military facilities, and ERG leadership. A second phase at higher intensity means infrastructure. It means power grids. It means the industrial base. It means the kind of strikes that don't just damage a regime, they dismantle it. And Trump knows exactly what that threat means to a government whose minimum wage has now fallen below $90 a month. That number deserves its own moment, because of all the economic data we have covered in 68 days of this war, the $700 million in daily GCC losses, the $114 Brent crude, the $4.46 US gas average, the rial at 1.84 million to the dollar. Nothing captures the human reality inside Iran right now more than that figure. Iran's minimum wage has fallen below $90 and the rial continues to lose value, hitting a new low this week. Iranians described layoffs, unpaid wages, and rising food and medical costs in messages to Iran International. We do not know how we can go on with these prices. Yesterday I bought 2 sausages. It cost 1 million rials. One viewer told Iran International, an amount equal to about 60 cents. 1 million rials, 60 cents, 2 sausages. That is not a geopolitical data point. That is a family's dinner. That is the economic reality of 68 days of war, a naval blockade, a currency in freefall, and an oil sector approaching permanent geological damage. And that is the reality that Iran's own central bank governor, in a private memo to President Pezeshkian, warned could take a decade to reverse. A regime whose citizens are paying 1 million rials for 2 sausages is not a regime with unlimited patience for a diplomatic stalemate, and its president knows it. Now let's talk about Israel, because the most explosive revelation of Wednesday, the one that caused the most immediate panic in the most careful diplomatic corner of this war, was not the move itself. It was one sentence from an Israeli official quoted by Times of Israel that arrived like a grenade into the middle of the story. An Israeli official told Army Radio on Wednesday that Jerusalem had not been aware that Trump was nearing an agreement with Iran. We were preparing for an escalation, the official said. We were preparing for an escalation. Israel, America's partner in Operation Epic Fury, the country that launched coordinated strikes on February 28 alongside the United States, the country whose defense minister has been publicly waiting for a green light from Washington to resume the war, did not know that its own ally was hours away from announcing it was closing in on a peace deal. The Netanyahu government scrambled. Netanyahu's office rushed to deny that report, issuing a statement attributed to a senior Israeli official insisting that the premier was not caught off guard and is in constant contact with Trump. But the denial came after the initial report spread globally, and the sequence surprise, denial. Reassurance does not read like a government that was informed in advance. Trump continues to insist on key red lines, foremost among them the removal of nuclear material, the Israeli official said. adding that Netanyahu has instructed the IDF to prepare for all scenarios, including a return to fighting if necessary. All scenarios, including a return to fighting. Israel is not a passive observer in what comes next. And if Tehran believes it can sign a memorandum with Washington that leaves Israeli security concerns unaddressed, particularly on Lebanon, where Iran has demanded any deal include a halt to Israeli operations against Hezbollah, that assumption is going to collide with the reality of what Netanyahu will accept. Tehran has thus far refused to agree to any wider peace deal that doesn't include a halt to Israel's fight with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That condition is something Trump cannot deliver. He cannot tell Israel to stop its Lebanon operations as part of an Iran deal, and Iran knows he cannot deliver it, which means either Iran drops that condition which its supreme leader publicly reinforced this week, or the moose talls on a Lebanese clause that the country writing the document cannot actually enforce. And then there is the Trump-Xi summit, May 14th and 15th, 8 days from now. The summit that was originally scheduled as a trade negotiation, farm produce, industrial goods, semiconductors, tariffs. The summit that got delayed by a month because a war broke out. The summit that is now inescapably a Hormuz summit. This meeting is deeply strategic, said Amir Hanjani. Tehran and Beijing are aligning their interests before Trump's summit with Xi Jinping, and the timing is deliberate. Trump, too, is likely to raise the conflict with Xi when he makes his expected trip. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio alluded to as much on Tuesday, when he told reporters he hoped China would push Iran to ease its chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. Rubio hoping China will push Iran. China already pushing Iran in Beijing on Wednesday. Iran flying its foreign minister to Beijing before the summit. Trump threatening bombs while simultaneously saying talks are very good. Pakistan saying we are getting close. The URG offering safe passage under unspecified new procedures. Oil dropping 11% in a day. This is not a stalemate. This is a negotiation reaching its climax point. And the 8-day window before Trump walks into Beijing is the most consequential deadline this war has produced. 3 scenarios now present themselves for the next 8 days. And I want to be precise about each one because the differences between them will define not just this war but the geopolitical architecture of the next decade. Scenario 1. Iran signs the MOU before May 14th. Tehran delivers its formal response to Pakistani mediators today. That response was expected Thursday, according to CNN, and the core terms of the 14-point memorandum are accepted with modifications. Uranium enrichment moratorium agreed at 15 years. Snap inspections accepted. Highly enriched uranium transferred out of Iran. Both blockades lift gradually over 30 days. Trump arrives in Beijing having ended the war. He walks into the Xi summit from a position of maximum strength, the man who closed a 1-1 for a barrel oil crisis and brought Iran to the table without losing a single American carrier. Global oil markets celebrate. The 1,600 trapped ships begin moving. The GCC stops losing $700 million a day. Scenario 2. Iran responds, but the uranium transfer breaks the deal. Iran's response accepts most of the MOU but refuses the clause requiring its highly enriched uranium to leave the country or refuses the destination being the United States. Trump told Netanyahu explicitly, according to Channel 12's reporting, that without agreement on this issue, there would be no deal. The 48-hour window closes without an agreement. Trump arrives in Beijing empty-handed. The bombing warning from Truth Social becomes operational. CENTCOM's prepared second phase strike plan is authorized. The war re-enters its kinetic phase at, in Trump's own words, a much higher level and intensity than before. Scenario 3. The deal is announced, but Iran's internal divisions prevent implementation. The White House itself told CNN that it believed Iran's leadership was divided and that consensus would be difficult to achieve. The URG and the Foreign Ministry have been running separate tracks throughout this war, one negotiating, one firing. And MOU signed by Iranian diplomats does not automatically translate into URG compliance on the ground. This is the scenario that keeps analysts most awake at night, a deal that exists on paper while Iranian naval units continue to threaten shipping, creating a diplomatic framework that collapses under its own contradictions within days. What we can say with certainty today, every word verified, every number sourced, is this. A 14-point memorandum of understanding is being negotiated right now between Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Iranian officials. Iran committed to a nuclear enrichment moratorium of at least 12 years. Iran agreed in principle to snap on inspections. 2 sources confirm Iran is considering shipping its highly enriched uranium out of the country. The MOU triggers a 30-day negotiation period after signing. Oil dropped 11% in 1 day on the news. A Pakistani mediator said on the record they would close this very soon. Iran's formal response is due today through Pakistan. China told Iran directly to open Hormuz and Iran deleted that line from its own readout of the meeting. 1,600 ships remain trapped in the world's most contested waterway. The GCC is losing $700 million every day those ships cannot move. An Iranian family paid 1 million rials 60 cents for 2 sausages this week. Israel says it was not informed and is preparing for all scenarios. And Trump arrives in Beijing in 8 days to meet Xi Jinping with the entire architecture of this deal either signed or shattered. The war that began on February 28 when American and Israeli jets struck Tehran has arrived at the moment every conflict eventually reaches. The moment where the cost of continuing exceeds the cost of stopping, where the economics overwhelm the ideology, where a regime that has watched its currency lose half its value, its minimum wage fall below $90, and its citizens pay 60 cents for 2 sausages has to decide whether the nuclear program is worth the price its people are paying for it in real time. China flew Araghchi to Beijing not as a courtesy. China has $700 billion reasons in the form of daily GCC losses and their own strangled oil imports to want this strait open. Pakistan said we are getting close. Trump is 8 days from Beijing. The one-page memo is on the table. 68 days after this war began, the most consequential 48 hours of the entire conflict are happening right now. Subscribe to Dr.elena.murphy right now. Iran's formal response arrives today through Pakistan. When it does, whether it says yes, no, or something that keeps the negotiating room open, we will cover it with every verified detail we can find. Hit the notification bell. This is the story, and it is not waiting. Tell me in the comments, do you think Iran signs this memorandum before Trump lands in Beijing? Or does the uranium transfer clause break the deal at the last moment, the way every previous round of talks has broken? Because your answer to that question determines what kind of world we are all living in on May 15th.